Hey there, this is Anthony from mycodeteacher.com, and in this lesson I'm going to show you how to download files from an outside server using NSURL connection. So if you've downloaded a lot of applications from the App Store, you've probably run into a few that are constantly communicating with some outside server. For example, the Facebook app or some of the Google apps. So right now I'm going to show you how to do that. So as always, we have Xcode open here, and I'm going to create a new project. We'll choose window-based, and we will title it Connection. So in this application, we're not going to actually create a user interface. We're going to leave the default white blank screen up. What we're going to do is we're going to use the console window to log whatever information we pull from a server and basically just check that everything's working there. So we're going to go to the connection app.delegate.m file here, and we're going to start by creating a method that creates an NSURL connection object and tells it to basically begin trying to download whatever file it stores from the internet. So first we need to do is we need to make a file for the connection object to download. So I have Coda here, and I'm connected to the mycodeteacher server in a video subfolder, and I'm going to create a new file. We'll call it downloadable file.html. I open it here, and we're just going to put some basic HTML here. So we've got our HTML file here, and now we're going to save this. Now that's uploaded to the server. So now we're going to hide this window here, and we're going to go back to Xcode. So now we're going to create the method that creates the connection object and begins the downloading. So just call it begin downloading. Of course, we're not going to be returning any value here. It's really just going to execute some actions. So the return type is void. And so now the first thing we need to do is we need to create an NSURL request object. As you might imagine, an NSURL request object stores a request for some URL. So if we go to the documentation here and look up NSURL request, scroll down a bit, there's a method here, request with URL. So this returns an NSURL request object with the URL we plug in here. Now you can see there's another object, NSURL. It really is just for storing URL strings, or basically strings that are formed in the way a URL is formed. So you can basically think of it as an NS string for URLs. And so you can see here there are a lot of methods here actually that allow you to work specifically with URLs. So the method we're going to want to use to create an NSURL object is the class method URL with string. So we can call to this method, which returns an NSURL object containing the URL that we plug in the string parameter here. And we're going to pass that object into the NSURL request object when we call to the request with URL class method. So let's close this here. So that probably was a bit much to take in, so we'll just program it out here so you can see what's going on. So NSURL request equals NSURL request with URL, and now we need to create the URL. So NSURL URL with string HTTP mycodeteacher.com/video/downloadable file.html. So you can see very simply by plugging in the URL of the file we want to download and passing it to a connection object, we can get any file we want. So now we need to create the NSURL connection object. NSURL connection equals NSURL connection alloc init with request. And we're passing in the request object that contains the file we want to download that we created over here. So pass that in, and then the delegate. So now what happens when you create an NSURL connection object is it automatically begins to download the file, and then it calls to its delegate and passes and actually uses a bunch of delegate methods to communicate with the application or with its delegate object. So there's a few methods here that each have a different purpose, and so rather than explain them all, we'll set this up and get this ready to go, and then we'll implement all the delegate methods, and you'll be able to see very simply what the purpose of each delegate method is. It's very obvious what the purpose is. Just for now, know that the NSURL connection object is going to begin the downloading, and then it's going to send messages to its delegate object based on what happens when it attempts to download that file. So delegate self. So we're going to, by plugging in self here, we're going to tell the NSURL connection object to send messages to this object here, the connection app delegate. So it's going to send it right into this object here, so we can implement the delegate methods right in this file, just to keep things organized and easy to find. So now we've created the NSURL connection object, and what we're going to do here is we're going to check to see that the connection actually has been initialized. So if it has, we're going to set up an NSMutableData object to store whatever data comes back from the file or that the connection object sends to its delegate. If not, we'll print some kind of error message saying the connection failed to be initialized. So if connection, we're going to leave this blank here because we actually need to create an instance variable to store the data, else nslog connection failed. So now we need to add an instance variable to this object here, the connection app delegate object, to store data sent to us from by the connection object that we just created. So again, this connection object that we've created here, once it's initialized, it automatically begins downloading the file stored in its request, and then it sends messages to its delegate. One of those is the data received from downloading that file. So it's going to send to us the file in data. So we need to store that data. So we're going to create an instance variable, NSMutableData, because we're going to assume that the data may not all come at once. In fact, it most likely won't unless there's a very small amount of data. So the connection object will continually send the data to its delegate in small pieces until it's finished downloading the whole file. So with that in mind, we need to make a mutable data object, an object that we can keep adding more data to as the connection object keeps sending us more data. So received data, we'll call it. Now we will save this. Now we can go back to the connection appdelegate.m file, and we're going to fill in this portion of the if statement here that we left blank earlier. So basically, if the connection is successfully initialized, we will create a data object and set the received data instance variable to point to it. So received data equals NSMutableData data retain. So the data method here simply returns an NSMutableData object, and then we call to retain to increase the retain count so that it doesn't get released while we're trying to use it. Now we can start to implement the delegate methods. So the first one we want to implement is connection did receive response. So basically, this will be called when the connection has received basically, obviously, a response from the server. So it sends a request to the server for this file, and then it's at the initial response from the server, it sends this message to the delegate. So void, of course, these are all going to be return type void. The connection object doesn't care what we do with this information. All it cares is that we receive this information. So it doesn't need anything back. It just is going to call to these delegate methods to basically let us know what's going on and then send us the data. Connection did receive response, and there's an NSURL response method here. We're not going to go into what NSURL response is. You can look it up in the documentation. We're just going to worry about what we're going to do when the response comes. And so here, very simply, receive data set length 0. So we're just going to set the length of the data array to 0. So now we're making it official that it has no data. Now we're going to implement the connection did receive data method. So void again, these all have no return value. Connection, NSURL connection. So in this first parameter here, the connection object passes itself. Did receive data, NS data, data. So very conveniently, it sends us data in an NS data object, and we can very simply add this data to our received data instance variable, append data, data. So now we have added this new data to our received data instance variable. Now we have it stored locally for use in any way we'd like. The next one we want to implement is the void connection did fail with error. So if something goes wrong, the connection object is going to tell us that the connection failed by calling to this method here. Connection did fail with error. We have something here, an NS error object. Error. So we're not gonna in this video we're not gonna dive into what the possible errors are, what the causes are. We're simply going to log to the console that the connection did fail. So first we're going to release the connection object. Then we're going to release the data because we had no use for it. The data has not finished coming. So it basically is corrupt, so to speak. And then we're just going to log to the console, connection failed. So we know if the connection failed. The last delegate method we want to implement is connection did finish loading. So when all the data from the file we asked for has been sent to us, the connection object will end by calling to this method here, the connection did finish loading object, and it'll pass itself in. So we're going to release the connection object again. Then we're going to log the data to the console. So actually we're going to use printf here. Printf const char, we're going to use typecasting here. We're going to assume that the bytes received or the data received is text, because it is, we're downloading an HTML file. Const char data, received data bytes. And we're going to log to the console connection finished and close the method. So now our URL connection delegate method implementations are all complete. So now all we have to do is actually call to the begin downloading method when the application launches and get everything going. So self begin downloading. We can save this and we can build the application. So again, there's no interface here. We left the default white screen, but if we click this button here, and bring up the console window, you can see here the way we implemented the connection did finish loading method. We printed out the data received, and of course this is what we received because this is the contents of the HTML file. So this is exactly what we expected to receive, and the connection finished from the nslog call here. So you can see that downloading files from a server is really not that hard at all, and once you get the hang of it, it really just becomes routine and a lot of copy and paste. So I'm Anthony from MyCodeTeacher.com. That concludes this lesson on downloading files from a server. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you tune into future lessons. Thanks for watching.